Welcome. We're going to be looking at trends and some really smart strategies for doing trend analysis and just kind of staying on top of the next big thing. I'd like to tee this up by just observing that I think we all find ourselves in a situation from time to time where some big innovation comes along that just seems so simple, so obvious, or so exciting, or just such a huge opportunity that apparently arose out of the clear blue sky. And we often find ourselves asking, why didn't I think of that? For me personally, the selfie stick is one of those, just such a simple, obvious, low-tech kind of innovation that swept the world. But there are, of course, many of those, and so it's interesting to step back and just kind of ponder, where do these big innovations come from? And this is a list of huge innovations that have cropped up just within, I think these are all less than 25 years old. If we think of the iPhone, not Apple, but the iPhone in particular, but Amazon, I think, is the oldest of these different innovations or different organizations. Amazon, I think, was founded in 1994. So, again, 24 years old, I think, is the oldest of all of these. And the market cap for just these companies is about $2.5 trillion, wow. Which, just by way of comparison, the GDP of Russia is about $1.5 trillion. Yeah. So just think about that. Things that did not even exist 25 years ago have come on the scene and grown to such phenomenal proportions that their collective financial value is greater than the GDP of one of the world's larger, more important countries. So when you ask kind of what causes that, where do they come from, the real answer is trends. And that's just kind of another way of saying that is that, all of these organizations had really amazing founders and leaders and very smart strategies. But Facebook didn't become Facebook because of just the brilliance of Mark Zuckerberg and the execution of the team. Amazon didn't become Amazon just because of the brilliance of Jeff Bezos. And that's not to take anything away from Bezos and Zuckerberg. They are brilliant people, and their teams did execute amazingly well. But still, you just don't grow to this size, this fast, without having kind of underlying forces supporting you. And again, those are just these larger trends. And a way that I like to illustrate this is kind of using this illustration of the way that tectonic plates create, the shifting tectonic plates lead to volcanoes erupting. So this little thing that we all learned in third grade science about tectonic plates shifting, grinding against one another, building up all of this heat and pressure that eventually gets released in a volcano. If you think of that as an analogy, these mega trends are these tectonic plates that are in motion, and they are grinding against one another, and they're grinding against current markets and current industries. And that grinding motion of those trends builds up all this heat and pressure, and then boom, something pops up out of the blue. Facebook, Uber, Amazon, as this enormous explosion of value creation and the emergence of an entire new industry and so forth. So I think it's a very apt analogy for how to think about the way that trends drive innovation. Okay. So in this workshop, what we are going to be doing is asking the question, okay, if we accept this premise that right this minute there are these mega trends in play that are about to create a volcano of activity somewhere, how do we spot that volcano before it occurs? How do we how do we become one of the individuals, one of the organizations that capitalizes on that enormous energy that is about to be released? Okay, so there are four core drivers of these megatrends, or sticking with our analogy, you might say there are four major tectonic plates that are out there shifting around the world. So the first of those is technology. Technology is constantly changing and evolving, and as that new technology becomes available or starts to permeate the world and our markets, that is one of those tectonic plates that shakes up the world. That one's kind of the most obvious of these, the one that we probably immediately look to and think of when we are looking for drivers of megatrends. The second, and really maybe much more relevant even than the technology, is demographics. You know, how are populations shifting? How, you know, are the characteristics of a population shifting? So, you know, if we look, for example, in places like India and China, one of the big trends is just the rapid movement of millions and millions of people into the middle class. People who are buying their very first car or buying their very first laptop, or you know, just kind of moving into a new spending level, changing values associated with that. So that's a demographic trend. The third major tectonic plate I would call is just overall cultural changes. And culture gets I think the easiest way to identify cultural changes is probably in changing regulation. If you think about the laws of the land as being reflections of the values of the people, with this kind of constant give and take between the different values within a nation and around the world, one of the ways that those show up is in you know, regulations, or maybe the budgets for the government and so forth. So those are all cultural changes. Also, it may just show up in normative behavior. You know, one that's an easy example to think about, and that someone my age has witnessed this change over a lifetime, is just the way that, say, tattoos are perceived. You know, in my lifetime, tattoos have gone from being something that were sort of taboo to something that has become mainstream. Or if you think about the sudden change in sort of marital relationships, things that, you know, with gay marriage becoming the law of the land, for example, big shift in the culture. So culture is, again, another one of those key drivers of megatrends. And then fourth and final would be the ecology. So without getting into what has become kind of this highly politicized issue of what causes the change in the ecology, it is certainly a fact that weather patterns change, climate does change, you know, the species living in a body of water change, and those things can have a massive impact on markets and on behaviors, and be a cause of a megatrend. So these are kind of the big tectonic plates that are, you know, slowly drifting about and kind of deep down affecting things. One of the things that I would highlight, if these are, you know, the really big, massive waves of change, kind of where these bigger trends collide, there are micro trends, okay? And these are really important because most of us are not going to catch a Amazon-size mega trend. What we're going to catch is something much, much smaller. You know, it's buried down in our little markets and our little industry, but they're really relevant. And I just want to kind of illustrate how this works. So let's say that one mega trend is automation, and, you know, drones is part of that story. Okay. And let's say that another megatrend is big data, artificial intelligence, et cetera. However you would describe that megatrend in technology. And a third megatrend is just ongoing population growth in the world as we move from whatever we're at, 7 billion to 10 billion people. And then another megatrend is one that I mentioned just a minute ago with demographics, is rising middle class. Okay, so you'll notice that within the where these things overlap, there are microtrends. So, for example, the rising middle class has driven a surge in the demand for almonds around the world. Poor people don't eat almonds, middle class people do. Okay, so that kind of combination of rising middle class population growth means that there's a lot more demand for almonds. Over here with drones and big data and artificial intelligence, a microtrend is the ability to do aerial crop monitoring more inexpensively. You used to have to fly over with an airplane. Now you can put a drone in the air with a little teeny tiny camera and have that all kind of immediately linked back to the cloud and big data analytics and all of that. So with these two micro trends, cool business opportunities have been presented to entrepreneurs that were sensitive to that. So here's an example of one of those. There's a company called Ceres Imaging, smart farming using aerial spectral imagery to optimize your fields. And basically, they are putting these drones up over the fields and analyzing dry spots and other kinds of issues with the crops, and much more efficiently targeting the delivery of water to the crops. This is interesting. This is taken from AngelList, just a search for water startups, and 384 companies in this micro trend category of companies that are developing innovations to address water shortage concerns. Okay, so lots of opportunity when you start to be sensitive to not only the mega trends but the micro trends, where you might find a really nice, profitable, fast-growing niche to exploit. Okay, so what I want to do now, that is kind of the theory of all of this, is that, just again to recap, if we are trying to find that exciting big opportunity, one thing that we want to do is be sensitive to the underlying trends that might be driving that opportunity. And we want to do that at the megatrend level, but a lot of times, where we can have our competitive differentiation, where we can really exploit our unique advantage, is by focusing on those micro trends. So from here on out, I want to just provide some tips and tricks for how to go beyond the theory down to actually identifying and analyzing, researching those trends. Okay, and so let me. I'm going to message this link to you just through the chat interface of Zoom. So bear with me while I do that. All right. So you should see a link pop up on your side right now. And this link will take you, if you, let me recommend that you just open the document so that you've got it, but then come back and look with me on my screen as I walk you through it.
Okay.
I want it to be open so you'll have it after the workshop is over, but after you've opened it, come back and let me walk you through it. Okay. So are you on my screen now?
Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm watching your screen. But
okay, great.
There should be a link I can click on.
Okay, so in the Zoom interface, I messaged a link to you. If you just click that link, it'll open in your browser. It's just a Google document. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want you to have that for future reference after we're done here. But if you'll come back to my, watching my screen, let me make sure you're back to me. Do you see my mouse moving?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, we identified those 4 major categories of megatrends: technical trends, demographic trends, cultural trends, and ecological trends. So what I'm going to do now is provide you with resources and tips for actually doing that research and identifying those trends. Okay. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start with technical. And with all of these, what I would recommend to you, let's say that you wanted to engage this as kind of a personal challenge, that I want to enrich my thinking about my company's business opportunity by identifying a few trends. For each category, the first thing I would do is just take a moment to just brainstorm. You're paying attention, you're reading, you're watching the news, you're reading industry reports. Just kind of unload your brain on the things that immediately come to mind in terms of what are major technical trends. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then a book that I would highly, highly recommend for not only understanding kind of the current trends, but getting a much more deeper theoretical perspective on how to just think about emerging technical trends is this book by Kevin Kelly, The Inevitable. And so I won't spend a lot of time on this, but he has this really great kind of framework that lumps a lot of the individual technologies into these 12 overall trends that he calls becoming, cognifying, flowing, and so forth. And you probably would need to get the book and pick a chapter and sort of absorb that, and then think about each chapter to really make that meaningful. But this is a tremendous resource, and I highly recommend it. Okay. Secondly, is something called the Gartner Hype Cycle for Emerging Technologies report. And I'm going to go now and just Google that. So if you search for the Gartner Hype Cycle, and then if you go to images, we can probably filter this for things within. Let's see what happens if we can find if anything comes up in the past. Let me do 2018 and see if we can get something. Okay. All right. So so this is for 2017. Let's go to the actual page. Gartner is a big IT research and consulting firm. They publish this report every year called the Hype Cycle. And their framework about just how technology emerges is that there is a predictable pattern where there's some sort of trigger for the innovation. Then there's a period where the expectations for that technology are inflated. And then it goes into what they call the trough of disillusionment, where everybody says, it's never going to work. And then things start to emerge on the other side of that and get actual traction. And then, eventually they become productive, oftentimes long after everybody stopped talking about them. One that you can think of as an example of this would be Google Glass or smart glasses in general. I forget the exact time frame, but let's say, 5 years ago, something like that, maybe a little bit more, people were talking about Google Glass as this amazing thing. Then it was suddenly it was a total bust. But now what we see is that Google Glass in particular and other smart glasses in general are finding a very, they're really thriving in B2B applications, right? And so that's an example of that. But this is updated every year, and it just provides a quick glimpse of what Gartner at least thinks of as, the 20 to 40 technologies that are currently on people's mind. So, virtual reality, augmented reality, these are things that are pretty familiar, but, what is cognitive export or cognitive expert advisors, cognitive computing and so forth. So it's good, set a recurring event on your calendar to go look up the Gartner hype cycle and spend an hour just kind of doing a quick sort of Wikipedia level bit of reading about what these different technologies are, just as a way of raising your personal awareness of what are the big technologies that are on people's mind these days. Okay. So that's one that you could do. I mean, literally right now you could go on your calendar, make that a recurring event, and you would be smarter about the technical trends by virtue of doing that. Another thing that I highly recommend as a way of kind of staying on top of all the news that's news with technology is to subscribe to Zimas' Exponential View newsletter. And so this is, I'll open this up. This link will take you here where you can join the mailing list. This comes out once a week. The archive is lags behind a little bit. But Kevin Kelly, who wrote the book that I recommend, uses Azim Azar's newsletter as his go-to source for staying on top of everything that's happening. Azim Azar is extremely respected, and he is kind of the thought leader's source for maintaining perspective on what's happening out there. So for this is just curated articles once a week. These kind of departments of the near future, Department of Automation, they change as you go, and then there are these fun ones, short morsels to appear smart at dinner parties. But quite a bit of material here. It's probably a little tough to keep up with this weekly, but if you subscribe and get this in your inbox and just challenge yourself to read even one of those articles, just scan through it once a week, pick one article that looks interesting and read it, you will find that your sensitivity to what's going on in the world of technology will be higher. And I think it also just kind of, that reading not only makes you aware of what actually has happened, but you start to develop a greater just feel for what makes technology go. So those are some tips. A book that you could read on an annual basis, taking a look at the Gartner hype cycle on a weekly basis, picking out at least one article from Azim Azar's Exponential View, and it would greatly enrich your ability to be aware of the major technical trends. Okay. Demographic trends. So again, I recommend that just do some brainstorming, but then a resource that I really like is the Occupational Outlook Handbook. This is something that's, I'm going to close out these other things just to free up my browser, but this is obviously a publication of the U.S. government. But if you follow that link, you come here to the Occupational Outlook, and this is where the Bureau of Labor Statistics projects where the jobs are going to be, and they do that by all these different categories. So by what kind of education is required, by how much on-the-job training is required, and the projected number of new jobs and the projected growth rate and the median pay. For me, this projected growth rate and this projected number of new jobs is sort of a direct analog to where, markets are expected to grow. So if I go in here and I say, where are we expecting 50,000 or more new jobs? You'll notice that my categories are 50,000 or more, 10,000 to, 50,000 and so forth. So this is the biggest category. This means that all of the analysts, the economists, the scientists who work for the Bureau of Labor Statistics to try to come up with these answers, here's where they think we're going to see, big changes. All right. And so if you look through this, it's interesting to kind of just, go through this. Let me see. You can also say, I want to see ones that not only there's a lot of new jobs, but the growth rate is very fast. Okay. And so if we do that, you will see like non-farm animal caretakers. Okay, if you click on one of these, where it gets helpful is this opens up. Notice that we were over here. We've opened up this page specifically on animal care and service workers. And then if you go to the Job Outlook tab of this, this is basically a trend analysis. Okay, so let's read it together. Overall employment of animal care and service workers projected to grow 22% from 2016 to 2026. And then you have to read between the lines a little bit, but here is why. So, this is a change in culture. Many people consider their pets to be a part of their family, are willing to pay more for pet care, right? That's one of those cultural changes that's occurred. So as more households include companion pets, employment of animal care and service workers in the pet services industry will continue to grow. Well, you can imagine that just by focusing your mind on this trend, exploding number, I mean, we know that there are more and more pets, but did we think about, all that goes with that? An increase in the number of animal care workers, probably an increase in the number of pet stores and so forth and so on. So you can see how that really does kind of get you thinking about opportunities that you may not have considered. Okay.
Interesting.
All right. So, yeah. So then another great resource is the Pew Research Center for Demographic Reports. And so if you follow this link, Pew is, an independent, nonpartisan research organization that puts out reports on all sorts of things, but they do a lot of demographic reporting. And so if you just if you are looking for food for thought, something that might trigger that big idea, I recommend just kind of browsing through some of these and seeing what they say. So, 7 demographic trends shaping the U.S. and the world in 2018. So millennials, projected outnumber baby boomers. A record number of Americans live in multi-generational households, part of a broader trend toward more shared living. Well, that one's kind of interesting. I mean, I personally would not have picked that, but, that might suggest all sorts of interesting innovations for people who are interested in shared living arrangements. What are the problems that you have with finding a shared living arrangement, living with a shared living arrangement? Do you need a new kind of kitchen or bathroom or utensils or financing options for people who are doing this? So anyway, that's a great way to find those demographic trends. Okay. So those are in the demographic category. Those are a few go-to tips that I recommend. For cultural trends, again, beyond the brainstorming, so consider major regulatory changes. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the laws of the land are a reflection of the society's values. Have major changes in regulation occurred that will impact professions or industries. So for identifying those, if you just go to Wikipedia to find the list of all U.S. federal agencies, okay, so let's say that you just kind of look down through the list of the agencies here. And, I'm going to pick the Department of Education because that's just something I'm interested in. So if you select an agency of interest, then Google the name of that agency and strategic plan and the year. So if I copy that, and I will go here. Except rather than doing USDA, I'm going to do Department of Education, and let's see if we've got, I'll put in 2018, see what happens. Okay, so here's the strategic plan for the U.S. Department of Education. Now, if you open this up, and all of these departments, I don't know if it's a law that they have to provided a strategic plan, but they tend to do it. And so anyway, this is not the most recent. Let me try that again. So I'm going to say Department of Education and Strategic Plan. Let's just do that. See what we get. Okay. So anyway, you can get to a. Okay. Well, without pulling up the whole plan, just look at this. So the department's 2018-19 priority performance goals. So improving the access to and the quality and transparency of school choice, improve borrowers' access to quality customer service. So by September 30th, 2019, federal student aid will improve customers' access to and availability of quality customer service by decreasing the overall average speed of answer to 60 seconds or less. I mean, that's a very specific problem that the Department of Education is trying to solve for people who are trying to get, service on their student loan information. Improve student privacy and data security. I mean, this again is just something that, okay, this is where our country is focused on this big topic of education. So I find just browsing through those strategic plans a really interesting way to, again, trigger thoughts. This one is this takes a few more steps. I'm not going to do it here, but researching changes in federal research and development spending. So let me just kind of read this. The U.S. federal government spends approximately $150 billion per year on R&D projects. Shifts in these budgets can signal not only significant changes in the values of the nation, but a long-term investment trend by the larger society. Does that make sense? I mean, if we have been spending, of that 150 billion, if we've been spending 15 billion on one area and that drops down to 10 billion and some other area picks up by 5 billion, it just signals something about changing values, because these are far-seeing investments. And it kind of says, the federal government thinks that this is where we need to be focusing that investment, right? So it's a great kind of early indicator of big trends. So anyway, to identify those shifts in federal R&D budgets and the trends that are driving them, here's what you do. So if you follow this link, it will give you, you can download these Excel spreadsheets that show the total R&D spending by agency over maybe the past 10 years. And so on the last column of the table, you'll see a percentage increase or decrease in spending over the past 10 years. Yep. So anyway, you can see it's just kind of a way of getting your finger on, here's kind of a follow the money strategy for identifying those trends. Research consumer trends. So there are probably many different ways of doing this, but Mintel is a big market research firm that publishes these annual consumer trend reports. So if you just, Google Mintel Consumer Trends Report, you will see, let's take out the report maybe. Okay, so here is a link. You have to, you have to put in your name and email and all that to download it, but you can download this very comprehensive report on, kind of global trends in the consumer markets. That's freely available and, very powerful. Okay. Browsing Pew Research Center publications. So we looked at demographic things, but Pew kind of covers a lot of things beyond just demographic changes. And I would just say, spending some time on Pew and looking at, social trends in any of these different categories are, pretty interesting. Okay. Something that is can be an interesting way to kind of get your, to to spot a trend is just by observing who are the movers and shakers in the world today. You'll learn a lot about the values of a society by considering who its heroes and leaders are. So, for example, Time publishes this annual 100 Most Influential People report. That as an example of a quick way to just kind of flip through it, see if just by looking at the names and thinking about the achievements that have put them on the list of the 100 most influential people, what does that suggest about kind of what people care about, what they're thinking about, just by looking at those. Okay. And then researching recent key events. I think if you just if you search for, the 2017 year in review, for example, you'll be surprised at how much you've kind of forgotten, but it's about what's been on everybody's mind. But it's this kind of quick summation of kind of the 10 big things or the 20 big things that we were all thinking about and talking about in 2017, and it can help you revive in your mind things that might have kind of drifted out of view just by doing those year in review reports. Okay. All right, so the last one, just to wrap up, is ecological trend research resources and tips. So if you just search the internet for climate change impact, and you'll see all sorts of things. The Environmental Protection Agency site used to, during the Obama administration, they published something. During the Trump administration, it's been taken down, but there's still a link to kind of the old report. And this is kind of interesting because, like, if you can go to a given region, like, if we go to the Southeast, for example, here, and see, kind of key things that, that were forecast by the government as things to be aware of. So, for example, sea level changes, and where are those likely to occur? So, South Florida, uniquely vulnerable to sea level rise. Well, that might suggest some ideas. Maybe I would bet pretty good money that if you were to, go into Miami, you would find that people are spending money and taking action to do lots of different things about the risk of sea level rise. How might that present a business opportunity? Impacts on water resources. I mean, for a company like yours, Alan, shifts in kind of rainfall and so forth are, maybe it presents opportunities for, chemical products to help deal with those changes in levels of water and average temperatures and so forth. So anyway, that's another interesting one as just kind of a resource that you can quickly identify. So anyway, if you've participated or just gone through the online videos about how to generate a business idea, and you may recall that kind of that process was, we're going to pick a search zone, and then we're going to brainstorm who the customers are, and then, for example, what is the customer's job to be done? Mm-hmm. And then what is the customer's problem, and what are the customer's solution? Well, I would tie all of this trend things back to that process by saying, if the next time that you are trying to come up with your big idea, if you, allowed yourself a couple of hours to just sort of enrich your mind with some of this thinking about big trends, that then when you go and do that brainstorming about what is my customer's job to be done, you'll find that that is now being informed by, well, my customer is having to deal with this change in technology. My customer is having to deal with this change in the population. My customer is having to deal with this change in cultural values or change in the ecology. And, what is the solution to my customer's problem? You'll find it's informed by this, and it'll allow you to start generating ideas and having insights that otherwise would have been impossible with just out kind of enriching your thinking with these really targeted inputs about key trend areas. And that's all that I had to share with you today. If you've got any questions about that, would be happy to take that.